and welcome back to the Riri Show. So I'm sure for those of you that support the Polkadot eco, or even those of you that are researching from outside the Polkadot eco, or if you've ever watched videos on Polkadot's YouTube, you probably know who our next guest is. But just in case you don't, he is the Director of Education and Community at Web3 Foundation, Kusama Council member, software engineer. He has written novels and textbooks, taught computer science at a university, and is a wealth of knowledge in the space. So please welcome Bill LABOON. Hi, Bill.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for coming.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Appreciate you having you on the show. You're so much further away from me, so our time worked, but just by a couple hours.
Yeah.
So we'll get straight into this, Bill, if you're okay with that. So my first question, if we're just going to jump right in, is we are going to get further into Substrate, et cetera, after this. So, but just quickly in a nutshell, what is Polkadot technology? And I know that's a big question, but just kind of in a nutshell, what are its capabilities? Why should we be excited about Polkadot?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question and sort of gets to the heart of the matter. Yeah. So the idea of Polkadot is that the ecosystem is not just a single blockchain, right? We have an entire ecosystem of different blockchains that can interoperate and communicate with each other. So if you'll allow me to be technical here for a moment, it's a system of, it's a heterogeneously sharded system with shared security and interoperability. So all this means is that we can take the work that needs to be done on in the Polkadot ecosystem and apply it and have it done by different blockchains, different shards actually. They all share security, so you don't have to worry so much about things like 51% attacks on an individual blockchain. Your blockchain is as secure as any other chain that's connected to what we call the relay chain, this central chain of Polkadot. And all of these chains can interoperate and communicate with each other trustlessly. So what this means is that Polkadot is, as founder Gavin Wood said, a bet against blockchain maximalism. The idea is that there are lots of different trade-offs that can be made and different functionalities and features that would be nice to have for different use cases. And if we can have all of these operating in the same ecosystem, that gives us an incredible amount of power and ability to do things in a decentralized way.
Right. And I think that's kind of why Polkadot's amazing, right? And Gavin's mentioned too, like this whole idea of trustless, this whole trustless interoperable ecosystem, which is really, really neat. So what problems then would Polkadot solve as opposed to maybe, Cosmos or a different ecosystem that is sometimes compared?
Yeah, good question. So the big problems that it solved, I would say really are two. So one from a user perspective and one from a developer perspective. And from a user perspective, it allows you to work on a particular chain that meets your needs, that does what you need to do, while still remaining in that ecosystem, right? So if you want to work on a particular DeFi chain, right, or a smart contract chain, or some of these other chains that have more specialized focus, you can do that, but still use the same wallet, right? You can use Polkadot, the Polkadot.js extension on all of these different chains, work in different ways while reducing the friction that's needed to go from one to another. So from a developer perspective, I think that the benefit is that you have a lot more power and flexibility to do what you need to do. There are a lot of limitations when you are forced to work within the smart contract paradigm. So if you're building a smart contract on doesn't matter, right? Ethereum or Algorand or Solana, it doesn't matter, right? Any of these systems, you're sort of limited to what you can do. You can't modify how transactions work. You can't have a feeless or gasless project or work on a different virtual machine. You're sort of forced to use what that chain offers you. But with Polkadot, since you can use Substrate, which I know we'll be discussing later, to actually create your own blockchain, come up with your own rules, that gives you just an absolutely massive amount of possibilities that just. It also adds just like that famous saying, more power comes more responsibility. It's more responsibility to develop it, but it also gives you the ability to do things like create a chain where if you lock up so many tokens, then you can participate with it feelessly, or you can operate in a different way or use a different smart contract programming language or a different virtual machine. It gives you a lot more power and flexibility. Really anything you can imagine, you can do because it's based on something called WebAssembly. This is what's called Turing complete, which means anything that is computationally possible to do, you can do. So this is just a huge new world, right? That's opened up by using Polkadot that you couldn't do on a traditional smart contract only platform.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's what's so incredible is Parachains are really then able to focus on, the building aspect of it. Whereas before, or with other blockchains, they have to kind of start from the ground up. So there's a lot more work involved there. So we mentioned kind of a little bit about Polkadot technology now, and I think one of the most appealing parts of that, which you kind of said, was Substrate. So why Substrate in particular? Like, what are the benefits of this framework, and what are some of the use cases here with Substrate?
Yeah, so I just want to say a little bit about the history of Substrate because I think that will sort of show why it's so useful. And so Parity Technologies actually had developed several blockchain client software in the past. So including a Bitcoin client, an Ethereum client, a Zcash client. And what they realized is that there are a lot of cut and paste things, right? Where things like generalized consensus or networking or data storage, right? It's not really essential to how that blockchain operates, how the data is stored on the local machine. But they had to, again, sort of copy and paste and do this over and over again. And so they came up with this idea of Substrate, which is like a framework for building your own blockchain. So the analogy I always have as a former web developer, it's like Ruby on Rails for blockchain. If you've ever used Ruby on Rails, you just, you start, you have, boom, a working website, right? And then you can, go in and modify and update things and get gems from people who develop tools and just, put them in. And it's the same thing with Substrate. You have, you obviously need some coding experience to do it, but you can grab what we call palettes, which have particular features. So things like democracy or balances, or different voting mechanisms, different consensus mechanisms. You just grab them and insert them into your code. So this means that you can really focus on, all right, what makes your blockchain special? What makes it unique? What makes it different? What do you want to do with that blockchain? And not okay, I've got to write low-level networking code, which I'm just going to copy and paste from somewhere else. And so what Substrate has been useful for is, along with another tool called Cumulus, is making parachains. But something I want to emphasize is that even though that has certainly been the main use, Substrate is a generic blockchain framework. So you can build your own blockchain. It does not have to be a parachain. In fact, there are quite a few examples of projects that have built blockchains that are entirely independent from Polkadot using Substrate. So Edgeware and Kulupu are just two examples off the top of my head. They're not parachains. They're fully featured blockchain, fully functional blockchains that you can develop with Substrate.
Right. Awesome. And I mean, what was cool actually is I remember watching, I think it was Behind the Code. I can't remember what episode, maybe one or two, but we saw a clip of Gavin basically downloading Substrate node template and basically using this framework. And I think his words were something like, let's see what I can do in 15 minutes. So, I mean, if that really kind of shows you how the base is really all there and you can kind of build on top of it. So I thought that was really interesting for sure. So in terms of
that actually, I'm sorry, yeah. I don't want to interrupt you. But,
go ahead. Interrupt me. That's what this is for.
Yeah, I mean, that video, the Gav's talk at Web3 Summit 2018 was really what got me to start at Web3, because he did the, make your own blockchain from a fresh out of the box Mac in 60 minutes or something. So even including the time to install all the dependencies and everything from a fresh MacBook, by the end of the talk, there was a blockchain running, and my mind was blown.
Yeah,
right?
that's impressive. That's so impressive.
Yeah.
Especially to somebody non-techie, because it seems like this is all honestly another language to me, but it seems so complicated, and you'd think you're looking at months, years, etc. But yeah, to see that, I was mind blown myself. I remember being like, wow, that's crazy. Yeah. So that was really interesting. So in terms of Polkadot in general, Polkadot and KSM, so the central chains are relay chains, and you have this layer 0 where Parachains can plug in, build on top of this foundation. And you have Polkadot and Kusama as part of this ecosystem. So I would love to hear from your mouth, why Polkadot and Kusama? How do they work together? I mean, Kusama to me, in my eyes, is such an incredible asset to the ecosystem, and really an ecosystem kind of within itself. And there's many projects that choose to stay on Kusama. So I'd love to hear you explain why Kusama is needed for those that are maybe new to .sama in general, or don't understand the functionality of it.
Yeah, so I think a good way to think about it is that Kusama is the fun, experimental, cool, fast-moving version of Polkadot, which is much more conservative. Features get added more slowly, only after being audited and tested on Kusama. So people then think like, oh, well, Kusama is just some test net. And no, there are other test nets. West End is the big test net for Polkadot. We also have Rococo, which is specifically for Parachains. We have other test nets for specific purposes out there. But Kusama has actual economic value behind it. And I think this makes a huge difference in terms of the stability of that final if we think of the final destination for code on Polkadot, because a lot of problems you can't really see until it's operating on a real actual network with economic value. So we've actually seen this. We've had some problems with Kusama, and so we've been able to modify the code or modify protocols before going and pushing it to Polkadot. It really reminds me, I'm kind of an old person when it comes to blockchain, of the relation between like Bitcoin and Litecoin, right? So this is sort of an informal version of Polkadot and Kusama, but Litecoin forked from the Bitcoin code base and made some changes, like it uses scrypt as its hashing out, hashing for mining algorithm, made some other changes, and new features tended to be tried out on Litecoin before they trusted on Polkadot. So a big things like atomic swaps. Right now, extension blocks happening on Litecoin. And we saw like a really good instance there. People were very worried about SegWit going on to Bitcoin. And so what happened on Litecoin was they put $1 million worth of Litecoin in a SegWit wallet. And they said, look, here's a real economic value, right? If anyone that can crack this and get $1 million worth for free, you couldn't do that on a test net, right? There's not, there's no incentive. And but that was able to prove to people on Bitcoin, like, okay, I guess SegWit is safe, right?
Yeah, right.
Kusama is this, yeah. And so Kusama is the same thing, right? You can try things out. Like, look, if someone did find a major problem in Kusama, then they could get the real economic value from it. And again, we've seen this in a few cases, but it also lets us try things out. Features and see if people want them, if they need them, if they're using them, how they're using them. Does it make sense, like to bring these to Polkadot? Does the additional complexity versus how much it's used, what outweighs it? And a lot of these things you can't do with the traditional testnet. So having this canary network, this in between a testnet and like the final destination, it gives us a lot of information that allows us to determine the future of Polkadot.
Absolutely. And I think that's so valuable. So I'm really happy to hear you say that, because I think that's a common thing is when people don't really know the Polkadot ecosystem or don't really understand how it works, it's easy to say it's just a test net, but it's really got like so much value and so much functionality within Kusama. So that's amazing. Okay, this seems kind of like an odd question, but I really want to know, like, what is Web3? And I know this is Gavin's vision, but in your eyes, what does this look like?
So I'm sad I can't find my hat. I have my my hat that I think describes it, which it's not in my room. Sorry. If only I would have thought of this.
That's all right.
But it says on it, less trust, more truth. And I think that's a good summary, right? So we want decentralized, private interactions that are transparent, if we want them to be. So it allows anyone to verify that what they're doing. Okay. So what I mean by this is, how I see the world of Web3 is a place where if I want to be private, I can. The power is in my hands. If I want to be transparent, I can. And if I'm going to interact with someone, I can verify those interactions. So just as a couple of examples, because I realize that sounds very abstract. If I'm sending funds, right, I'm sending Bitcoin to someone, or if I'm sending wrapped Bitcoin on Kusama to someone, I can see that they received it. I can, if something goes wrong, I can go in and look and see, oh, right, I didn't send enough for fees or however. But in a lot of ways, you can't do that, right? If you're sending money from one bank to another, I'm trusting the bank, right?
Right.
So there have been times, I'm living in Switzerland, but you may tell from my accent, I am not Swiss. So I've had to send money from the U.S. and it gets hung up in the bank somewhere. Several times this has happened, and it's a big pain. I have to ask someone to help me for it. But we do this all the time. We may not realize it. I'm trusting Amazon, right? When I make an order or whatever e-commerce business, that they're not just going to take my money and run, or that they're going to send me the right book. I have no idea what their code looks like, what happens when I execute it. And a Web3 world, I might be able to there would be more transparency. There would be less, prioritized or privileged roles in a Web3 world. So you may have seen the London Metals Exchange recently. There was a big short squeeze and the nickel price went up, some dramatic amount. And the company just rolled back. They said, okay, these $3.5 billion worth of trades, they never happened. Okay. All right, so maybe they're doing this for good reasons, but I don't know. I have no control over it. The people that traded then, they don't know what's going to happen. It's all in the power of these others. I think the whole idea of Web3 is to take that power and spread it out. Okay, and allow me, right, and by making things immutable, if they have some code, right, and if they did this in a smart contract way that said, yes, we can roll back transactions. Well, I would know that ahead of time. And I could, okay, I'm not going to operate with them. I can see, what they would do under these circumstances. And it's, it's sort of the difference between, don't do evil and can't do evil. If, maybe there are good people in charge of this, maybe they have good reasons. I don't know. I'm not trying to say anything bad about them, but the point is I have no way of knowing. Yeah, we have no way of knowing. And they have all the power to, do what they want. I have no way of knowing what code they're going to follow. Both code in the software code sense, but also like code of ethics, right? I'm just relying on them. I'm trusting them to do the right thing, as opposed to a Web3 world where you will be able to see ahead of time what will happen and understand it.
Right. And I think ethics is really a huge, huge topic in modern day right now. Like that's a whole other can of worms that we don't have time to get into today. But the whole ethical debate is a really kind of a good backing to why cryptocurrency, blockchain, and all this is so important, right? So you touched on something actually really, really interesting to me in a recent interview with Cryptos Chain, which by the way was a fantastic interview. I really enjoyed it. But Dot's 100 parachains were brought up. But an interesting point you made was this idea of secondary and tertiary parachains that would allow for kind of a plethora of parachains to be able to connect. And when I heard that, I was like, wow, because that really means that Dot could become this like titan of an ecosystem. I mean, is this something we could see in the near future? And really, could that mean that like thousands of parachains could potentially exist?
Yeah, so actually a lot more than 1,000. So if you think about it, again, 100 parachains has always been our estimate, but it could be more, it could be less. And if you think about having a relay chain, and then that relay chain has up to 100 relay chains connected to it, and then those relay chains have 100 relay chains connected to those, and that's like 100 cubed, so 1 million different parachains.
Yeah, wow,
which is, I mean, that's just absolutely massive. And of course, there's a lot of potential fun there, right? A lot of spinning up a blockchain quickly and removing it later once you don't need it. Even if we don't get up to that many parachains, you still are talking hundreds of thousands or 1 million transactions per second, which is, I mean, I hate to sound like Bill Gates, you said in the 80s, 640 kilobytes should be enough for anybody, at least for the foreseeable future, right? Hundreds of thousands of transactions per second, that's more than Visa does. And of course, there's always things like layer 2s, L2s. There's no reason those couldn't be operating. Yeah, I mean, you really could have this whole internet of blockchains. From Polkadot that all would be able to be secure and interoperate with each other trustlessly. So that sounds really great, but it turns out, of course, there are some issues, right, that need to be worked through. So this is not something that you'll be seeing in the near future. This is still a few years out, and obviously every time someone says something is going to take n amount of time in software, it usually takes more than n. Yeah, n plus 1 or times 2 or something. But it's certainly something, that we're looking into. There's no real reason it can't be done, but there are some engineering challenges involved. Right, so one thing, for instance, is that network topology becomes much more important. Right now, if you're a parachain A or parachain B connected to the relay chain, there's no real difference in terms of communication, right? But if you're, parachain A and parachain B are connected to the same sub relay chain, their communication is going to be much quicker than if it has to go, to this, hop, and that just causes some complications, as well as how these parachains are going to secure slots and things for individual relay chains, and maybe there'll be more overhead and more communication. But again, all of these are engineering challenges, really. Like theoretically, there's no reason it can't happen, but that's not being worked on immediately. That's a plan for the future, several years down the line.
Right. And I think now too, like we already are seeing so many fantastic parachains that are launching. And I think I'll just take this opportunity to just tell you how excited I was to hear that the lease period 7 parachains have launched. So for those of you watching, we just saw Statement, and I wrote these down so I didn't forget anybody, but we have Statement, Acala, Clover, Moonbeam, Astar, Parallel, Composable, Affinity, Nodal, Centrifuge, Interlay, and Hydra DX, all in that cohort. So that was exciting. And we also saw, self-funded Moon River. Did you see the meme where the Scooby-Doo meme? So that cracked me up. So that was exciting news. So there's lots going on in the ecosystem right now. But this this kind of was an interesting question to me, this next one here. So in terms of adoption, so we've spoken now kind of about the framework and blockchain aspect of all of it. So do you think these technologies could then help with, and you kind of touched on this briefly, but could help with the force of centralization that we've been living in for so long? And people are kind of so accustomed to this centralization. I mean, when something feels comfortable, it's kind of often hard to get away from it. But is absolute and true, like real true decentralization possible once full adoption and regulations and all this come into play?
So I think, we're starting to get into philosophy, right? Because what do we mean by absolute and true decentralization?
That's fair.
Yeah. So I see decentralization as a spectrum, and I think that it's really hard to pin down what exactly that means, because any system that says it's entirely decentralized, there are going to be some people in it that are just because they focus more time on it, they're going to have more power or more understanding. So I think that if you try to say like absolute true decentralization, every single person is equal, that's this it's a goal, but it's sort of utopian. That said, that said, I think that Polkadot helps push the needle closer towards that goal, because again, you have this ability compared to other blockchains. I mean, I think blockchain technology as a whole is incredibly important and has helped decentralization immensely. But with Polkadot specifically, the fact that you can build a parachain from the ground up, do whatever that that it needs to do, right? Again, you're not limited. But so you could do, if you want to have a parachain that anyone can do anything for free, write any message, you can create that, right? And that's awesome, right? What we're going to see is that some of these will fail though, right? But people should have the opportunity to try it, right? We want it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, right? Some of the spaghetti, it's not quite ready, it falls to the floor, and some of it's overcooked and it right? But if it sticks to the wall, it's okay. We want to throw lots of this spaghetti at the wall. So I think it is it's pushing it in the right direction, but I also think you are going to have people that want to opt into regulations, and they may do that in a particular like subset, right? You may even have something strange, what seems strange to us, like a geographically limited parachain at some point. That's possible to do, or opting into regulations of some specific country, or you may have people who don't want to have the responsibility of owning their keys. They want to have some sort of a custodian for them. So again, like true decentralization, it's this goal, and so I think we're going towards that. I think Polkadot allows for much more movement in that direction, but this is going to be an ongoing goal. And I think part of that is Polkadot, and I think part of that is societal, that we want to encourage people to do things on chain, to understand what it means to do things on chain, to feel comfortable doing things on chain. And that's a slower process, and it's not entirely technological. So obviously there are some technological things we can do to make it easier, right? To make better UIs, to teach people more. But I think a lot of it is just a very slow process. As people become comfortable with interacting with the blockchain, then that will enable our society to decentralize more.
Right, absolutely. And I think that that's kind of what I was saying about, we are so stuck in this centralized world that, the idea of kind of everybody switching their mindset around is definitely going to take some time, but it's nice to see Polkadot kind of pushing in that direction. So one of the other major parts other than Substrate of Polkadot is that it is proof of stake. So first of all, for those that are newer to crypto, can you just very, very briefly touch on what is proof of stake and the benefits of proof of stake?
Sure. So very briefly, and I actually have a whole video of this available somewhere that I can link about the differences between proof of stake and proof of work.
Perfect. We will link that actually. I'll put that in my description.
All right, great. So the idea is it cannot be very easy to create blocks in a blockchain. There needs to be some penalty for trying to produce two valid blocks. Otherwise, you're vulnerable to what's called a double spend attack. Which again, we can discuss that, but the point is it should never be too easy to make blocks. And so a proof of work, you can make blocks by essentially guessing a number,
right.
guessing, billions and billions and billions of numbers to produce blocks. But this uses a lot of electricity. In fact, Bitcoin uses more electricity than Switzerland. So there's, yeah. Bitcoin uses a lot of electricity. Now, again, other blockchains don't use as much, and you can argue that much of this electricity would be wasted. This is a whole argument, but the point is, Bitcoin uses a lot of electricity, and proof of work systems, by their nature, use a lot of electricity. Proof of stake, the idea is you put some tokens up as a bond. And in proof of work, if you try to create two valid blocks, your penalty is you just wasted a lot of electricity creating one of these blocks. With proof of stake, you're essentially putting up a bond. You're saying, hey, if you catch me cheating and trying to do this, then you can what's called slash me. You can take away some percentage up to all of the bond. So an analogy I heard, it's like you have these miners that are free to run, but if you ever try to cheat, then nuclear bombers just destroy them. They're gone.
Right.
You lose your stake. So the benefit is you're not using this electricity. You're putting up internal tokens as your bond instead of this this externality, this electricity. So it's much more energy efficient to use proof of stake, and for a lot of reasons that would take a while to get into. It also means that it's much easier to have shorter and more consistent block times. So Polkadot and Kusama both have 6-second block times. And this would be very difficult to do in a proof of work system, but relatively easy in a proof of stake system.
Right. So, I mean, in terms of staking too, Polkadot's going through some kind of changes and updates in that department right now. So can you kind of elaborate on some of the changes being made in terms of staking on Polkadot?
Yeah. So right now, as you probably are aware, if you're staking on Polkadot, there is a 160 DOT minimum for staking. Right. So I just sort of want to explain why that's there. It's not just because the developers are mean. So every change is in Polkadot has to be approved by the DOT holders, right? So remember, anytime you hear about an upgrade on Polkadot, DOT holders have voted for it. So the problem is that it's very important for Polkadot for various security reasons that validators have approximately the same amount of stake. Okay, so something you may notice is that validators, the block producers in Polkadot, we try to treat them as equally as possible, and there are good security reasons for this. The problem is when you have tens of thousands of nominators, figuring out the best way to allocate stake amongst the 297 validators turns out to be a very computationally difficult problem. And if you spend too long working on this problem, it actually has an impact on the stability of the network, because we need to know, right, who are going to be the next the validators in the next set. And so what we actually saw was potential out of memory errors of nodes if we just let anyone nominate. It's actually could be vulnerable to an attack on the network. If you wanted to attack the network, you could just split your DOT up into a million different accounts with one DOT each and try to nominate, and then it would be very difficult to get new validators into the set because you couldn't figure out what the best way to do it is. So as a quick solution to this problem, we put a cap on the number of nominators, and then to ensure only the top N, right now 22,500 people could nominate, or accounts actually could nominate. Then we put a minimum amount of DOT. Okay, there are other ways to do this, but we figured that this was the most fair. And again, this was voted in by the dot holders.
Right.
So Keon, who from Parity, has been working for quite a while to make sure we get all the benefits of using this particular algorithm we use called Fragment, which I'm probably mispronouncing. I think it's Swedish, Fragmain. Maybe if you have any Swedish listeners, they can.
Sounds
they can
good
help
either
out.
way.
Yeah. So to make it work in a slightly different way using something called bags, which it would take quite a while to go into, but the basic idea is that we can increase the number of nominators. However, the number that get rewards will actually be dynamic. So you're not 100% sure when you'll get if you'll get rewards, but that also will be based on stake. But what this allows us to do actually is allow users to influence their place in line. So if they're willing to pay some fees to move up in line, they actually can have a better chance of getting these rewards. But it also means that we can increase the number of potential nominators. So we're looking right now to do that up to about 50,000, and decrease the minimum amount of DOT necessary to participate in this. So there's actually a referendum happening right now on Polkadot. So if this sounds like a good idea to you, again, all decisions are in the hands of the dot holders. So you'll go to the Polkadot.js app or your favorite wallet, and you'll vote if you're in favor of this occurring. And there are a lot of details. If you follow me on Twitter or on Subsocial or on Reddit, I post the Polkadot Digest. I explain what's happening. I include links every month to Keon's updates. He tries to put it in a non-developer readable way of what's happening with staking, the changes that are being made, the problems, why it was decided to do things one way or another. And so he's even had AMAs. So we really try to communicate what the benefits of this are and what the drawbacks are as well. There's always in software, there's never a perfect solution, right?
Right.
So these are the major changes that are happening. But in the long run, we're looking at increasing that. There are a lot of optimizations, and in the really long run, we actually have discussed having a staking specific parachain. So you'd have a parachain that would handle all of this, and it would just give its results back to the relay chain essentially in a trustless format. And this would essentially eliminate any minimums, right? So essentially the existential deposit probably would be the minimum for staking, but that's still some time in the future.
Of course. I was actually reading this discussion on Polkassembly, and I think it's important to note that it's not easy calculating and trying to determine all these changes. But I mean, governance is definitely a big part of Polkadot, and I'll touch on that as well. But this is actually something that I'm also excited to hear about. So in cryptocurrency in general, in blockchain in general, the word inflation generally has this like negative connotation around it. People hate the word inflation. They're like, ooh, inflation.
Yeah.
But it can be beneficial. So can you explain why inflation in Polkadot is actually needed?
Yeah, so the idea of inflation in Polkadot is sort of twofold. Or I'd say there are two main things. There are a lot of reasons, and I would, if you're really interested in this, Jonas Gerlein, who is a researcher at Web3, has written several papers on this. I think he's actually giving a talk at the University of Zurich.
Oh, awesome.
In the very near future. We can probably add that as a link.
Yeah, let's add it in the link. Sure.
Okay. But the basic thing is twofold. So one, it ensures that there is some price to pay for locking up your DOT, right, for parachains. So there should be some price, right? And I'm not using price in the terms of dollars and cents, but I mean price in terms of a cost, right? It's something that you give up. And so by locking your DOT in a parachain, you're giving up the ability to stake, right, and get staking rewards. And since staking rewards, right, come I'm sorry, what's the word? Incentivize
right.
Nominators and validators to do what they need to do, right? So Otherwise, if we had no inflation, and inflation, yes, it is a cost for the network as a whole, right? You're by inflation, you're losing some percentage of control of the network by default. But these nominators and validators, then we're encouraging them, and we're encouraging people to stake. And remember, with proof of stake, this is actually encouraging the security of the network. So we're incentivizing them without fees, right? So if you think about, if you look, there's been some papers about how will Bitcoin have security in the far future when there's no more block rewards, there's just fees, right? This fee-based mechanism. And one of the things people talked about is in order to have or conclusions people have come to, I should say, is that in order to have a good fee-based security, you need high fees, right? That's not something we want. We don't want to have high fees, right? So inflation is sort of a necessary evil, I guess you could say in that sense. So here, we have a way of encouraging validators to be able to produce and have incentives for doing that, infinitely, or at least indefinitely, into the future, as well as having some sort of cost for locking up for parachains. So it actually is a kind of a circular, maybe the wrong word, but interdependent, right? When you think about all of the different things you can do with DOT, right? You can stake and you'll get staking rewards. So you'll stay even or perhaps beat inflation. You can lock DOT up, and so generally you get some sort of incentive from the parachain, or you can keep it free, in which case we want this free liquid DOT to circulate, right? And so you're incentivized with inflation to do something with your DOT. It's just like the sort of the Keynesian argument in a regular monetary supply, right? If you know that your money is going to be worth less tomorrow, you're going to do something with it now, right? And so sort of a similar idea. You can either again, sort of your three main things you could do with DOT. Keep it free and liquid, but the drawback is that you're losing to inflation. Stake, so you're keeping up to it, and lock in a parachain. Lock in a crowd loan for a parachain, or even get your own parachain. But then you have the drawbacks that it's not liquid and you're not keeping up with inflation. So it's a very different way of looking at things than sort of the classic like Bitcoin model, where inflation is always bad, right? And we want to minimize that as much as we can going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a stigma because it definitely comes all into play. And I think definitely with proof of stake, you have this kind of whole other can of worms here. So definitely. So in terms of, we have a couple more topics to get through here. Hopefully we can get to some community questions, but governance. So governance is truly one of this, democratic Polkadot's greatest assets. And what makes Polkadot's governance special? And can you tell us what changes are being made to governance currently?
So I think the really cool thing about governance is that in an entirely decentralized way, you can change anything about the chain and ensure that it will be implemented, right? It's not some multi-sig that it's Gav and a couple of guys, we'll vote and tell them what to do, and they'll modify things. It's up to the users, right, to do things, and you could propose anything, on Polkadot, and it will get implemented if it passes, right? If it follows the governance mechanisms. To me, this is amazing, right? Right now, you can have really technical things like the increasing the number of nominations on Polkadot, like what's happening now, or on Kusama, the current referendum is about increasing the number of HRMP channels, right? Again, so yeah, not everyone cares about that, but it's really cool, right? All of these parameters can be modified and voted on by people. I think that's awesome and incredibly powerful. But as I already mentioned, Polkadot is always trying to be more decentralized. And so there are, some aspects of our governance that, even though they don't have a privileged position, sort of, a priori, just sort of starting out. There are people that have more power than others. So for instance, I am a member of the Kusama Council. I was voted in. I think like 111 accounts are currently voting for me. Always would love to have more votes if you're interested in having me represent you. But this council has certain powers. I mean, there are certain limited and prescribed powers, and most things that are passed by the council, they have to go through a referendum as well. So it's not as though the council is all powerful. But we do have a council. We have a certain number of people, 13 on Polkadot, 19 on Kusama, that have some elected amount of power over the network. We also have the technical committee, which gets voted on by the council. And again, technical committee has a very prescribed, very limited amount of power. It can just make things, referenda go faster. But both of these are sort of, like they're not perfectly decentralized, right? Nothing is, but they're certainly, they could be more decentralized.
Right.
And so there's some changes coming to governance, again, if DOT holders vote on them, to essentially remove the council and the technical committee from the equation. And everything would be a referendum by DOT holders. And this sounds, someone on Reddit said it was cool but scary. And I think that's a great summary, because there's all sorts of potential issues, right, when you put things entirely in the hands of the DOT holders. And so basically, there are going to be different kinds of referenda. So that will have different amounts necessary to pass, necessary quorums, so things for treasury, for instance, you wouldn't be able to try to quickly vote a treasury proposal to give yourself $1 million DOT, and if you only have 100,000 DOT, well, of course you'll vote to give yourself $1 million,
right?
And things like that. So different things, depending on how they impact the network, would have different ways of passing. So this, I think, is going to be really cool. Again, I hope that the DOT holders vote for it, because it really is, it's decentralizing more and more. I mean, again, as a council member, I find it it's a little scary. I'm giving up my own position.
I was going to say, I'm surprised you said that.
I think, I mean, it's not to sound too grandiose here, but it's just like Satoshi Nakamoto, right? He removed himself from Bitcoin, and look what's happened, right? It's decentralized more and more. And again, not trying to sound like I'm Satoshi at all, but
you sound like Satoshi to me. Okay, you sound
thank you.
Way up there.
But it's the same principle, right? I think if a project can have its leader removed, right, and its council members removed from the equation and still continue on, I think that makes it more powerful, right? It certainly proves its decentralization and its abilities. And I think that's what, Polkadot, we want to do, right? We want to decentralize further and further. We want to put more and more power into the hands of the DOT holders. And so I think this is a big step towards that. But, it's a little bit scary. But again, I think it is. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it kind of does come into play with kind of what you were saying about, the needle going further over towards decentralization. Well, it's just pushing more and more that way all the time. Okay, so my next topic, and I'll touch on some other stuff kind of after in this episode. We'll try and get through a few more with you here. But XCM and bridging is a big topic right now. And it's a popular question in the community. So XCM version 3 is kind of the talk. So any new features in XCM version 3, and how will this version help with bridging? And I know the implementation of this is a really hot topic for projects right now.
Yeah, so I actually, I don't think I tweeted it out today. Yeah, it was today. But with Gav's a link to the PR for XCMv3, which I really recommend if you're interested in this, that you review, and please feel free to send questions my way, because a lot of it is it's pretty technical. But let me give a sort of high level overview of what it's bringing. So first is, of course, the support for bridging. So how it does this is a few concepts that are new to XCMv3. So like universal location. So what this means is, just like on the internet, if I go to, whatever, foo.com, like from anywhere, I can get to foo.com. And so it's like this idea of, especially as we get more and more parachains and maybe, parachains within parachains in the far future, then this will allow us, to very easily find our ways. So this is actually very similar, like, in the old days of ARPANET, where you had to say, like, go to this computer, then this computer, then this computer, instead of just foo.com, and then just let the system take care of it. So XCMv3 lets that. Instead of saying that, like, all right, go, I'm going from here to here, it's like I just enter one location, it's universal. There's also something called universal origin, which is kind of related to this. And this is going to allow a bridge to forward a message and have it be executed as though it was coming from the bridged location. So as opposed to, like, the sort of the bridge, just say, all right, we'll do this on my behalf, right? We can have it actually done in a trustless way from where that bridge is, have it appear it's coming from XCM standpoint, where that bridge sent it from. So this is like, from a bridging perspective, again, this is kind of technical, that along with something called some updates to the send XCM function. So it operates in multiple stages, which means that you can figure out how much weight is going to be in operation before you actually decide to do it. Again, these are kind of technical, but essentially they make bridging easier, right? So we can have more bridges and bridges to other consensus systems, like, Polkadot Kusama or Polkadot to other external networks. But there's some other, like, I think more easy to understand things. So like there's gonna be support for burning. So that, like, like the concept of burning tokens will be built into XCM, and non-fungible tokens. Right. So again, being able to bridge and, having non-fungible tokens be bridged and transported, and remote locking. So you can, like, lock assets, not just send them, lock and unlock from one chain to another, which could be useful. So basically what XCMv3 is going to do is provides a lot more options for what can be done. And this is going to have a lot of impact on bridges, which is, obviously something, Polkadot is very, very focused on. Excuse me. So as we add v3, what we're going to see is that bridges work better, are going to have more functionality, and are going to be easier to develop because we have sort of better primitives to build these bridges.
Right. I'm bullish on bridges. I'm excited for the bridge. I think it's a really good thing. And I mean, I think one of my favorite things about Polkadot is just that, Gavin is not this competitive person, but rather this person that wants to see everything kind of work, coincide and work together. And then I think that's why I like, big reason why I like Polkadot so much is it's less about butting heads and more about, like, how can we make the tech work, right? So let's jump into, if you have time for just a couple community questions, I'll kind of pick out a few. That would be great. So our first one is from Chow Yun Stacks, and he says, how would you explain, actually, you know what, we kind of answered this a little bit, but I don't know if you have anything else to touch on here. How would you explain the key difference between .sama and Cosmos?
Yeah, so I see, that we're running low on time. So first I'll say, like, the big difference is that, Cosmos does not have this concept of shared security. You've got these independent blockchains that can interoperate. So there are some similarities, but there is an entire article on this actually on the Polkadot wiki. So we have done some comparisons. So not just with Cosmos, but also with ETH2 and a few other like bridging systems or interoperability protocols. So if you're interested, all of these were done. So if you just go to the wiki and do a search for whatever chain you're interested in, we actually reached out to people from those chains in their community, and in some cases even developers of those chains, to ensure that we had a sort of as unbiased as we could make it comparison of all right, here are the benefits, here are the drawbacks, here's how they're different, here's the different philosophies, and actually a lot of those are written by Logan Sather, whom I know you had on the show a little while ago. So I recommend if you're interested in that, yeah, go to the Polkadot wiki and you can see we've written a lot of differences with a lot of different chains.
Perfect. And I had a couple from somebody named Fluff here, but you know what, Fluff, we actually answered a bunch of your questions already. So that was perfect. We talked about feelessness and inflation and all that stuff. And I think another one was about burning mechanisms, which we also already covered. So we did good. I had some questions about Bill, but we are out of time. But maybe we can do this again sometime and touch a little bit more on the background of who Bill LABOON is, because you are quite an impressive person. But I will continue on with this episode and kind of touch base a little bit about some interesting facts about yourself. But I so appreciate you coming on my show. I had such a good time talking to you.
Yeah, as did I. It was my pleasure. And I guess just my personal life will just be a mystery for now until the next time I'm on.
Yes, absolutely. Next time I'm doing a Who is Bill episode. Who is Bill? But do make sure, honestly, Bill, you have one of really the most informative Polkadot Twitter pages of all time. I mean, he's updating everything. Polkadot Digest is out all the time. So make sure you give him a follow. I will link everything below that we talked about. So yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for coming. We'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, thank you.